concerned about his state, the coasts, and those of the others on the Gulf Coast. I know he's working hard to see that the federal government makes the appropriate response. Madam President, tonight the President of the United States speaks to the nation from the Oval Office about the oil spill. The oil spill is in its 57th day. I would like, with respect, to suggest what I hope that the President does not do tonight and what I hope that he does do, because the entire nation's attention is focused on this tragic spill, the consequences to the people in the Gulf, the consequences to the people in this country, and it creates great worries about our future. Number one, what I hope the President does not do tonight is use the oil spill as an excuse to pass a national energy tax, collecting hundreds of billions of dollars from Americans and driving jobs overseas looking for cheap energy. The other reason the so-called cap-and-trade national energy tax is not appropriate here, because it has nothing to do with cleaning up this oil spill. Because not only does it drive jobs overseas, it also does not work when applied to fuel. We've had plenty of testimony before the Environmental and Public Works Committee that if you simply raise the gasoline tax, you're not going to change behavior enough to reduce the amount of carbon. And finally, when applied to utilities, it does it prematurely before we have found ways to recapture carbon from coal plants in a way that hopefully will permit coal plants to make money from the carbon rather than raising the price of everybody's electric bill. So number one, I hope the President stays focused and doesn't follow the advice of the White House Chief of Staff, which has been so often quoted: never let a crisis go to waste. This is a crisis, but don't try to mislead the American people into thinking that the cure for the oil spill is a new national energy tax that drives jobs overseas looking for cheap energy. Number two, I would hope that the President, while helping us figure out what to do about the oil spill and making sure that it never happens again, doesn't destroy the rest of the Gulf Coast economy in the meantime. The senator from Louisiana, Senator Landrieu and Senator Vitter, have both spoken eloquently on the livelihood of so many in that area. We don't stop flying after a terrible airplane accident, and we're not going to stop offshore drilling after a tragic spill such as this one. What we need to do is to find out why it happened and to make sure it doesn't happen again. 30% of the oil we produce in the United States comes from thousands of wells in the Gulf of Mexico. 25% of the natural gas that we use in the United States comes from thousands of wells in the Gulf of Mexico. If we were to shut them down, natural gas prices, home heating, gasoline prices, all would skyrocket, and we would rely more on tankers from overseas that have a worse safety record than the offshore oil drillers. Number three, I hope the President won't recommend, as the current legislation pending in the Senate does, that we spend taxes collected for the oil spill trust fund on something other than cleaning up the oil spill. Now let me say that again. I think Americans might be looking at Washington and wondering, what is this? You mean to say I'm paying a higher gasoline tax, in effect, to go into a fund to clean up the oil spill, and the Congress is thinking about spending that money on something other than cleaning up the oil spill? The answer is exactly right. The proposal that's on the floor before the Senate today would raise from 8 cents to 41 cents the per barrel fee on oil that's supposed to be used to clean up the oil spill and spend it on more government. So that's another thing I hope the President does not do tonight. Hope he remembers that it is called the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. And if we want to re-earn the trust of the American people, we would spend the oil spill cleanup money on cleaning up the oil spill. And finally, Madam President, I hope the President does not pretend that renewable electricity has anything to do with reducing our dependence on foreign oil. Already, I see the ads for the windmills that the big corporations are putting on. But let's think about renewable electricity for just a minute. We're talking about oil in the Gulf. We use oil for transportation, not to create electricity. Renewable electricity, wind, solar, and biomass, creates electricity, which we don't need in new amounts for transportation. So a clean energy program that is a national windmill policy or a national solar energy policy or national biomass policy may be useful for the country in some ways, but it has nothing to do with reducing our dependence on foreign oil. I'll say more in just a minute on how we can do that. But let's stop just for a minute, if I may, to back up what I just said. Solar energy, for example, is 1/10% of the electricity we produce in the United States. We all hope someday that we can reduce its cost by a factor of 4, put it on rooftops as an intermittent supplement to our electricity needs. It has great potential for that. But the better way to spend money is on research and development to reduce its cost, not to pretend that somehow solar panels have anything to do with cleaning up the oil spill. Biomass has some potential. Biomass is sort of a controlled bonfire. We have in the forests of Tennessee and New Hampshire and other places dead trees from the pine beetle or for other disease. Cleaning them up, burning them to create electricity is a good idea. And there's biomass that our industrial sector can burn to create electricity. But the idea of cutting down and burning trees to create large amounts of electricity is a preposterous idea in the United States. As an example, one would have to continuously forest an area 1.5 times the size of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park in order to produce enough electricity to equal 1 nuclear reactor. And in foresting an area 1.5 times the size of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, you'd have hundreds of trucks every day running up and down the mountain, belching out fumes, carrying the wood to a place to burn it. And finally, wind, which has become the pet rock of the energy 21st century policies. Wind can also be a useful supplement in our country, but it's important to know that it only produces 1.8% of our electricity. And wind turbines have nothing to do with reducing our country's dependence on oil. In addition, there are many other more efficient ways to produce clean, carbon-free electricity. For example, I just mentioned that wind produces 1.8% of all of our electricity, maybe twice that much of our carbon-free electricity. Nuclear power produces 20% of all of our electricity, 70% of our carbon-free, pollution-free electricity. One reactor equals 186,000 of these 50-story wind turbines. The Tennessee Valley Authority in the region where I live has in its dependability portfolio these figures. It can depend on wind 12% of the time to be there when it needs it, because of course you can only use it when the wind blows, and it compares nuclear 91% of the time to be there when it needs it. And then we've all seen and heard the awful stories of the pelicans immersed in oil. Well, that's not the only form of energy that causes a problem with birds. The American Bird Conservancy says the wind turbines we have today kill up to 275,000 birds a year. And one wind farm in California killed 79 golden eagles. So the point, Madam President, is that we need renewable energy, and we need to advance it. And we hope that solar becomes cost competitive and biomass can be useful, and so can wind power. But it has nothing to do with reducing our dependence on foreign oil. Now, what do I hope the President does say tonight, Madam President? Well, number one, hope the President stays focused on cleaning up the oil spill. Cleaning up the oil spill. We need a plan to fix the problem. We need accountability for the regulation of such drilling. We need to ask the question, where is the President's plan? And where are the people and the equipment necessary to implement the President's plan to clean up an oil spill? This is not the first time we've had such a spill. After the Exxon Valdez tanker spill, that's different, but it's still a big spill of oil. The country was convulsed by that, and Congress acted. It created the Oil Pollution Control Act of 1990. It says the President shall ensure that he has a plan to clean up a worst-case oil spill and have the people and equipment to do it. Effectively, the President has delegated that job to the spiller. Perhaps President Bush would have done the same. Perhaps President Clinton would have done the same. But if the only option the president has under our current law is to delegate the job to the spiller, perhaps we should change the law, and we should discuss that. And perhaps the president will make a recommendation on that. But tonight, the first thing is clean up the spill. Get the job done. Plug the hole. Number two, help people who are hurt. I come from a state where we've just had a 1,000-year flood event, where we've had $2 billion of damage just in Nashville alone, and the flood damage went all the way to Memphis. We know what that kind of pain is, and people are busy helping each other and cleaning up and not looting and not complaining. But we feel deeply for the people on the Gulf Coast, and we would like to help them. We would like to help make BP pay. We would like to help raise the limits on the Oil Spill Trust Fund, and we would like to suggest that one might consider, the Congress might, the nuclear energy model of insurance for the future, because that model gets all of the nuclear companies involved in, one, making the nuclear reactors safe, and in two, cleaning up any sort of accident that they had. I'd like to see a similar sort of insurance fund for the oil well companies, so that you don't have just BP involved in cleaning it up, but you have every other oil company interested also in providing the technology and the help and the advice to do the job. Now, the third thing that I hope, and the final thing I hope the President does, is chart a way for our clean energy future. I've heard a lot about that on the other side of the aisle, and there's a great deal of bipartisan cooperation in this area, and let me be specific. For fuel, I hope the President will renew his call for support for electric cars and trucks. Republican senators, all 41 of us, have said we support the idea of electrifying half our cars and trucks. That's a very ambitious goal for our country, but we can do it, and it's the single best way to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. The estimates are that electrifying half our cars and trucks, which would take a while, would reduce our dependence on oil by 1/3. We'd still be using 12 million barrels of oil a day. Senator Dorgan and I and Senator Merkley have introduced bipartisan legislation to create a better environment for electric cars and trucks in America, and the President has strongly urged this idea, and Secretary Chu has worked hard to create support for batteries and for cars. There's room for bipartisan agreement on the single best way to reduce our dependence on oil, and that would be by encouraging electric cars and trucks, electrifying half of them. Number two, for electricity, the single best way to produce clean energy is nuclear power. 100 nuclear reactors produce 20% of our power, but 70%, as I said, of all of our carbon-free electricity. Senator Webb and I have introduced legislation to create an environment in which we can build 100 more nuclear reactors. Now, we don't need these reactors in order to have electric cars and trucks. The Brookings Institution and the Obama administration have said we don't need to build one new power plant in order to electrify half our cars and trucks, because we have so much extra electricity at night that if we plug them in when we sleep, we can have electric cars and trucks and no new windmills, no new nuclear plants, no new coal plants for that purpose, But if we need new green electricity, the best source for it are nuclear power plants. They're the most useful, they're the most reliable, and they do the least damage to the environment. The number of deaths at a civilian U.S. power plant, a nuclear plant in America, is 0. The number of deaths in the Navy nuclear fleet since the 1950s, when nuclear reactors have powered our ships, is 0, because there's a system of accountability and a very good record. So it's electric cars and trucks for fuel, nuclear power for electricity. The President's been very good in the last few months on nuclear power. He's appointed strong members to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. He's appointed strong members to a commission to deal with used nuclear fuel. He's done a good job of beginning to get the loan guarantees going for the first new plants. So electric cars and trucks and nuclear power are areas where we should be able to work in a bipartisan way in the future. The third area is on energy research and development. The President has recommended and the Congress has approved more money for energy research and development. Republicans support doubling our energy research and development for a clean energy future. That would mean such projects as reducing the cost of solar power by one-fourth of today's cost. That would mean recapturing carbon from coal plants. It would mean a 500-mile battery, which would almost guarantee the electrification of half-hour cars and trucks over time. It would mean intensive research to find ways to recycle used nuclear fuel in a way that doesn't isolate plutonium. And it would also mean research for making biofuels from crops that we don't eat. Making great advances in solar, carbon recapture, electric batteries, nuclear recycling, and biofuels would be the third important part of our energy future. And while we're at it, Mr. President, Congress should pass the Clean Air Bill that Senator Carper and I and 15 senators have co-sponsored. There's 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans, 1 independent. While we're figuring out what to do about carbon, we can go ahead and do what we know how to do, which is reduce pollution from mercury, sulfur, and nitrogen at our coal plants. So there are 4 things that I would hope the President would talk about that have bipartisan support: for fuel, electric cars and trucks; for electricity, nuclear plants; energy R&D for solar, carbon recapture, batteries, nuclear, clean fuels; and finally, the Clean Air Bill that Senator Carper and I and others support. This is an important time for our country. It's a time when we deserve bipartisan action. It's a time when we deserve to look to the future. It's a time when we need to focus on cleaning up the spill, helping the people who are hurt, planning for a future, and do it in a realistic and bipartisan way. I thank the President. I yield the floor. Mr. President.